I stood in my childhood kitchen on Christmas Eve morning hearing my sister Sarah's voice for the first time in 3 years through the thin walls. But instead of excitement, horror washed over me as Sarah said to our mother, "Mom, we need to talk about putting Jeanie in a care facility. She's become such a burden, and honestly, I think she's faking how helpless she is for attention. The insurance money from her accident is running out anyway." My secret hearing recovery was supposed to be a Christmas miracle surprise. Now it had become my worst nightmare. 3 years ago, I was Jeanie Morrison, a 25-year-old elementary school teacher in suburban Dayton, Ohio. I lived in a cozy apartment near Riverside Elementary, where I taught 3rd grade. My life revolved around lesson plans, parent conferences, and the pure joy of watching 8-year-olds discover they could read chapter books. I had a boyfriend named Trevor Weekend Plans, with friends and dreams of eventually buying my own house, with a garden, where I could grow vegetables. Everything changed on a Tuesday evening in January. I was driving home from a faculty meeting when the winter storm hit harder than the weather service had predicted. Snow swirled across Highway 35, making visibility nearly impossible. I slowed to 20 miles per hour, gripping the steering wheel as my Honda Civic crawled through the blizzard. The drunk driver never saw the red light. His pickup truck slammed into the passenger side of my car at 50 miles per hour, sending my vehicle spinning across the intersection like a toy. The impact threw me against the driver's side window, and my head struck the glass with a sickening crack that I felt more than heard. When I woke up in Miami Valley Hospital 4 days later, the world had gone completely silent. Dr. Martinez, a kind neurologist with gentle eyes, explained that the head trauma had damaged my auditory nerves. The technical terms blurred together, but the reality was simple and devastating. I would never hear again. The drunk driver, a 42-year-old construction worker named Dale Hutchinson, had walked away from the crash with minor bruises. My family rallied around me initially. Dad Robert Morrison took time off from his accounting firm to stay at the hospital. Mom Linda brought homemade soup and sat beside my bed for hours, learning basic sign language from YouTube videos. My sister Sarah, who was 26 and worked as a dental hygienist, rearranged her schedule to drive me to doctor appointments. My younger brother Marcus, 23 and fresh out of college, moved back home temporarily to help with my care. The insurance settlement from Dale's liability coverage was substantial, nearly $200,000 after legal fees. It covered my medical bills, rehabilitation costs, and provided some financial security during my recovery. But money couldn't replace what I had lost. Teaching became impossible when I couldn't hear my students' questions or participate in staff meetings. Trevor, my boyfriend of 2 years, tried to be supportive, but our relationship crumbled under the weight of changed communication and his obvious discomfort with my disability. Within 6 months, I had lost my job, my relationship, and my independence. The apartment I loved became too expensive on disability payments alone, so I moved back into my childhood bedroom in my parents' 2-story colonial house on Maple Street. The room still had my high school graduation photos and the lavender walls I had painted during sophomore year. Learning to navigate the world without sound proved more challenging than any textbook could have prepared me for. Simple tasks like answering the door, talking on the phone, or following conversations became enormous obstacles. I enrolled in American Sign Language classes at the community center, but progress felt agonizingly slow. Most of my family learned basic signs, though their patience varied significantly. The first year was the hardest. I struggled with depression, spending entire days in pajamas, watching television with closed captions while my family worked and lived their lives around me. I felt like a burden, a permanent house guest who couldn't contribute meaningfully to the household. Family dinners became exercises in frustration as conversations moved too quickly for me to follow, even with my newfound signing skills. Gradually, things improved. I found a part-time job at the local library helping with data entry and shelving books. The work was solitary but satisfying, and my supervisor, Mrs. Chen, was patient about accommodating my communication needs. I made friends in the deaf community and started attending social events at the Dayton Deaf Center. For the first time since the accident, I began to feel like I might build a meaningful life again. But I noticed changes in my family's behavior over those 3 years. The initial outpouring of sympathy and support gradually shifted into something more complicated. Sarah's helpful gestures became tinged with impatience. Marcus started avoiding family gatherings, claiming work obligations. Even Mom and Dad seemed tired, though they tried to hide it behind forced smiles and overly cheerful conversation. I told myself I was being oversensitive. They had sacrificed so much to help me adjust to my new reality. Dad had used his vacation days for my medical appointments. Mom had learned to cook foods that were easier for me to eat when I was still struggling with balance issues from the head injury. Sarah had given up weekend plans countless times to interpret for me at important meetings. Of course they were tired. Anyone would be. The climactic revelation came 6 months ago, though I couldn't have known it at the time. Dr. Patricia Reeves, my audiologist, called me into her office with news that seemed impossible. Medical technology had advanced significantly since my accident, and a new type of cochlear implant had been approved for patients with my specific type of nerve damage. "Jeanie, I want you to understand that this isn't a guarantee." Dr. Reeves explained, her words carefully measured. "But based on your latest scans and hearing tests, you could be an excellent candidate for this procedure. The success rates for patients with your injury pattern are very promising." The surgery took place on a Thursday morning in June at Kettering Medical Center. I told my family it was routine follow-up care, not wanting to raise false hopes if the procedure failed. Dr. Stevens, the surgeon, explained that recovery would take several months, and that improvement might be gradual. I spent 2 weeks with my head wrapped in bandages, telling everyone I was dealing with complications from an ear infection. The first sound I heard was my own breathing. It happened 3 weeks after surgery, a soft whisper that made me gasp with recognition. Within 2 months, I could hear voices, though they sounded strange and electronic through the implant. By November, my hearing had returned almost completely. Music sounded different than I remembered, more mechanical, but voices were clear and distinct. I decided to keep my recovery secret, planning to surprise my family on Christmas morning. The idea filled me with excitement and anticipation. I imagined their faces when I responded to their voices, when I could participate in conversations again, when I could be a full member of the family instead of someone who needed constant accommodation. The next few months became an elaborate performance as I planned what I imagined would be the most beautiful Christmas morning our family had ever shared. I spent countless hours crafting the perfect surprise, researching every detail to ensure maximum emotional impact. The plan consumed my thoughts during my library shifts and filled my dreams at night. Working with Dr. Reeves, I developed a believable scenario for the Christmas reveal. She would arrive on Christmas morning under the pretense of conducting a routine hearing evaluation, something she did quarterly anyway. During the appointment, with my entire family present, we would discover that my hearing had mysteriously returned. Dr. Reeves was initially skeptical about the deception, but agreed to help when I explained how much I wanted to give my family this moment of joy. I carefully selected Christmas gifts that would demonstrate my restored hearing without revealing the secret beforehand. For Dad, I bought a vinyl record of his favorite Beatles album, something I could only have known he mentioned if I had heard him talking about it. For Mom, I purchased tickets to the community theater production she had expressed interest in seeing during a phone conversation she thought I couldn't follow. Sarah would receive a book by an author she had recommended to Marcus in my presence, and Marcus would get a video game he had mentioned wanting while talking to his girlfriend. The gift shopping required careful planning. I had to pretend to struggle with communication while actually listening to sales associates' recommendations. At Barnes & Noble, I let the clerk write down book suggestions instead of responding to her spoken words. At GameStop, I pointed to items and used gestures to convey my interest, all while secretly hearing every word of the staff's conversations about holiday releases. Each day became an exhausting exercise in maintaining my deception while gathering information for the surprise. I had to ignore phone calls when family members were present, pretend not to notice when the television volume changed, and avoid reacting to unexpected sounds like car doors slamming or the neighbor's dog barking. The mental energy required to consistently behave as someone who couldn't hear was enormous. During family dinners, I positioned myself strategically to observe conversations, while appearing to focus on eating or reading lips. I learned that Mom was worried about Dad's high blood pressure, that Sarah was considering a career change, and that Marcus was having relationship problems with his girlfriend, Amy. This knowledge would make my Christmas gifts even more meaningful, showing that I had been paying attention to their lives in ways they thought impossible. I wrote and rewrote the letter I would read to them after the hearing reveal explaining my journey back to the world of sound. The letter described my gratitude for their patience and support, my excitement about rejoining conversations, and my hopes for the future. I practiced reading it aloud in my bedroom, imagining their tears of happiness and the group hug that would surely follow. The close calls almost exposed me several times. When the smoke detector went off during Mom's cooking disaster in November, I instinctively turned toward the sound before catching myself. When Marcus dropped a glass in the kitchen, I nearly offered to help clean up before remembering I supposedly hadn't heard the crash. Each near mistake reminded me how carefully I needed to maintain the performance. I started noticing things about my family's behavior that I had missed during my 3 years of actual deafness. The way Sarah rolled her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. How Marcus checked his phone constantly during family time, clearly wanting to be elsewhere. The subtle tension between Mom and Dad during discussions about household finances. These observations troubled me, but I attributed them to normal family stress rather than anything sinister. The whispered conversations became more frequent as Christmas approached. Family members would huddle in the kitchen or step outside to talk, always stopping when I entered the room. I assumed they were planning their own Christmas surprises or discussing gift ideas. The thought that they might be talking about me in negative ways never seriously crossed my mind. Sarah's behavior became particularly puzzling during December. She would arrive for family dinners with a forced brightness, asking loudly about my day and commenting on how well I was adapting. Her compliments felt excessive and somehow artificial, but I dismissed my concerns as leftover insecurity from years of feeling like a burden. Marcus started bringing Amy to more family gatherings, and I noticed how they exchanged glances when they thought no one was watching. Amy seemed uncomfortable around me, though she was always polite. During one dinner, I caught her staring at me with what looked like pity mixed with something else I couldn't identify. When I waved, she smiled quickly and looked away. The most unsettling change was in Dad's behavior. He'd always been my strongest advocate, the one who researched disability resources and encouraged my independence. But lately, he seemed distracted during our conversations, cutting them short or delegating my care to Mom and Sarah. When I asked him to help me understand some insurance paperwork, he promised to look at it later, but never followed through. Despite these warning signs, my excitement about Christmas morning continued to build. I imagined Dad's proud smile when he realized his daughter had overcome another obstacle. I pictured Mom crying happy tears and Sarah hugging me while apologizing for all the times she had seemed impatient. Marcus would probably make jokes about how I had been secretly eavesdropping, but he would be thrilled that his sister was whole again. The plan seemed perfect. Dr. Reeves would arrive at 10 in the morning for what everyone believed was a routine appointment. The family would gather in the living room, probably reluctantly since medical procedures weren't particularly entertaining. During the hearing test, I would begin responding to sounds showing confusion and excitement as my hearing returned. Dr. Reeves would express amazement at this unprecedented recovery, and then I would surprise everyone by responding to their voices. Christmas Eve arrived with unseasonable warmth for Ohio, in December temperatures reaching nearly 50 degrees. The forecast called for possible thunderstorms, but I took it as a good omen. After 3 years of silence, even the sound of rain would be a gift worth celebrating. I went to bed early, setting my alarm for 6 in the morning so I could prepare mentally for the big day. I fell asleep clutching the letter I had written, dreaming of my family's joyful faces and planning how I would spend my first Christmas in years as a full participant in every conversation, every joke, every moment of connection. Tomorrow would change everything. Tomorrow I would finally come home. I woke up at 5:30 on Christmas morning, too excited to sleep any longer. The house was completely quiet, which I found ironic, given that I was about to reveal my return to the world of sound. I tiptoed downstairs to make coffee, wanting to savor these last few hours of my secret before everything changed. The kitchen felt different in the early morning light, filled with promise and anticipation. Mom had left Christmas cookies on the counter, and the smell of cinnamon and vanilla created the perfect holiday atmosphere. I poured myself coffee and settled at the breakfast table, reviewing my plan one final time and imagining how magical this day would become. Around 7:30, I heard Mom's footsteps upstairs, followed by the shower running. Dad's alarm clock went off at 8, just as it had every morning for the 20 years they had lived in this house. Sarah was supposed to arrive at 9 with her husband Jake and their 2 kids, Emma and Tyler. Marcus and Amy were coming at 9:30. Dr. Reeves would arrive at 10, and then the most beautiful surprise of my life would unfold. At 8:45, I heard Sarah's car pull into the driveway. Her kids burst through the front door with typical Christmas morning energy. But instead of running to find presents under the tree, they headed straight upstairs to find Grandma and Grandpa. I smiled, remembering my own childhood Christmas mornings when patience was impossible and magic seemed to fill every corner of the house. Sarah came into the kitchen a few minutes later, and I waved cheerfully while continuing to drink my coffee. She smiled back, but something seemed forced about her expression. Jake followed behind her, carrying a plate of homemade breakfast pastries that smelled incredible. "Good morning, Jeanie," Sarah said loudly, using the exaggerated speech patterns she had developed for communicating with me. "Merry Christmas." I smiled and signed "Merry Christmas" back to her, keeping up the performance, even though my heart was racing with excitement about the surprise to come. In just over an hour, I would be able to respond to her voice normally, and we could have real conversations again. Mom and Dad came downstairs, followed by the kids who were practically bouncing with excitement about opening presents. The usual Christmas morning chaos began with coffee brewing, breakfast preparations, and everyone talking at once. I positioned myself at the kitchen table where I could observe everything while staying out of the way. Marcus and Amy arrived right on schedule, and the house filled with the warm noise of family gathering. I watched everyone's faces, memorizing these last moments before everything would change. Soon I would be able to hear Emma's giggles, Tyler's excited chatter about Santa, and all the conversations that had been happening around me, but without me for 3 long years. At 9:15, something shifted. The adults seemed to have some kind of silent communication, and suddenly Mom suggested that the kids go upstairs to play video games until it was time to open presents. Emma protested that she wanted to help in the kitchen, but Sarah insisted they needed grown-up time to finish preparations. Once the children were safely upstairs, the atmosphere in the kitchen became noticeably tenser. I continued drinking my coffee and checking my phone, pretending to be absorbed in social media, while actually paying careful attention to the family dynamics around me. Sarah glanced around the room, making sure I was focused on my phone, then moved closer to Mom. Her voice dropped to what she thought was an inaudible whisper, but my cochlear implant picked up every word with crystal clarity. "Mom, we need to talk about putting Jeanie in a care facility. She's become such a burden, and honestly, I think she's faking how helpless she is for attention. The insurance money from her accident is running out anyway." The coffee mug slipped from my hands, but I caught it before it hit the table. My heart started pounding so hard I was afraid they might hear it. I kept my eyes fixed on my phone screen, fighting to control my expression while my world crumbled around me. Mom's response was barely audible even to my enhanced hearing. "Sarah, don't say things like that. She's been through so much." "Be realistic, Mom," Sarah continued, her whisper sharp with frustration. "She's 28 years old and acts like a helpless child. Look at her sitting there scrolling through Facebook while we handle all the family responsibilities. She doesn't even try to help with anything anymore." Marcus moved closer to join the conversation, and I realized this was a planned discussion that had been coordinated in advance. My hands shook as I pretended to type a text message, using the activity to mask my reaction to their words. "Sarah's right," Marcus said quietly. "The insurance money won't last forever, and we can't keep supporting her indefinitely. Mom, you're 62 years old. You shouldn't be spending your retirement years taking care of someone who could be doing more for herself." "But she's family," Mom whispered back. "She's been through trauma. The doctors said it would take time for her to adjust." "That was 3 years ago," Sarah replied. "At some point, adjustment has to turn into independence. And frankly, Mom, I think she understands more than she lets on. Watch her around strangers. She milks every situation for sympathy, playing up the helpless deaf girl act." I felt physically sick listening to these words from my sister, the person who had learned sign language to communicate with me, who had driven me to countless medical appointments, who I had trusted completely with my vulnerability. Marcus leaned against the counter, warming to the topic. "She's learned to weaponize her disability. The dramatic gestures, the helpless looks, the way she positions herself in conversations so people feel sorry for her. It's manipulative. And convenient for her," Sarah added. "She gets free room and board, no real responsibilities, and constant attention. Why would she want to change that?" Jake, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke up. "Maybe we should consider what's really best for everyone. Sarah's been stressed about this situation for months. It's affecting our whole family." My husband Amy nodded in agreement. Amy mentioned that family gatherings have become difficult. Everyone feels like they have to walk on eggshells around Jeanie. The betrayal felt like a physical blow to my chest. These people had been discussing my life, my future, my worthiness as a family member, and I had been completely unaware. Worse, they had been portraying me as manipulative and lazy, when I had been working so hard to rebuild my independence and contribute to the household in whatever ways I could. Remember how attention-seeking she was even before the accident. Sarah continued, her voice gaining confidence as the others agreed with her assessment. She always needed to be the center of everything. Drama followed her everywhere. Now she has the perfect excuse to be completely dependent. "That's not fair," Mom protested weakly, but her voice carried doubt. "Isn't it?" Marcus challenged. "Think about it, Mom. She's always been dramatic. Remember in high school when she convinced everyone she had a learning disability just to get extra time on tests, or when she dated that guy sophomore year and claimed he was emotionally abusive when he was actually just trying to get her to be more responsible? I had never claimed to have a learning disability. I had received legitimate academic support for organization issues that my school counselor identified, and my high school boyfriend had been emotionally manipulative, something my parents had acknowledged at the time. The way they were rewriting history to support their current narrative made me feel like I was losing my mind. "She's always found ways to avoid real responsibility," Sarah continued. "Even her teaching job was part-time by choice. She could have pursued administration or taken on leadership roles, but she preferred to stay comfortable in her little third-grade classroom." This was completely false. I had loved teaching third grade and had been actively pursuing my master's degree in educational leadership when the accident happened. I had taken on extra responsibilities at school, including mentoring new teachers and developing reading curriculum. Their revision of my pre-accident life was so inaccurate, it was almost surreal. Dad entered the conversation and his words hit harder than anyone else's because I had always counted on his support and understanding. "I've been in contact with some lawyers about having Jeanie declared incompetent," he said quietly. "If we can demonstrate that she's unable to manage her own affairs, we can gain guardianship and make decisions about her care and finances." The room fell silent for a moment as the implications of this statement sank in. They weren't just complaining about me behind my back. They were actively plotting to take away my legal rights and control over my own life. "Robert," Mom said, her voice shocked, "you can't be serious." I'm completely serious, Linda. We need to think about everyone's future, not just Jeannie's. Sarah and Jake are struggling financially, especially with Jake's job situation. Marcus and Amy are starting their own family and need support, not additional burdens. And we're not getting any younger. Amy spoke up for the first time. Marcus mentioned that Jeanie still has significant money left from the insurance settlement. If she's not going to use it productively, maybe it could help the whole family. That's her money, Mom said, but her protest sounded weak and uncertain. Is it? Dad asked. She's not capable of managing it responsibly. We've been paying her bills, managing her medical care, providing housing and food. In effect, we've been her guardians already. Making it legal would just formalize what's already happening. Plus, Sarah added, if she's in a proper care facility, she'll get the specialized attention she needs. Professional staff who are trained to work with people like her. She'll be around others in similar situations instead of feeling isolated in a hearing family. The phrase people like her felt like a slap across the face. I was their daughter, their sister, not some category of person they needed to manage or dispose of. The casual way they discussed removing me from the family, taking my money and controlling my life, was breathtaking in its cruelty. We could use Christmas to present a united front, Dad continued. Show her that we've all agreed this is what's best for everyone. Frame it as a loving intervention rather than an ultimatum. The timing is perfect, Marcus agreed. She'll be emotional anyway because of Christmas. We can emphasize how much we care about her future and want her to get the best possible care. And if she resists, Sarah said, we can point out how much stress she's placing on Mom and Dad, appeal to her guilt about being a burden. The word burden echoed in my head like a curse. After 3 years of trying so hard to contribute, to be grateful, to minimize my impact on their lives, they saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to their happiness and financial security. Jake checked his watch. When is that doctor supposed to arrive for Jeannie's appointment? 10 o'clock, Mom replied. Just a routine hearing check. Perfect, Dad said. We can have this conversation with Jeanie after the appointment. The doctor being here might actually help reinforce the message that she needs professional medical supervision. I realized with horror that they were planning to ambush me immediately after what they believed would be a routine medical appointment. They had no idea that Dr. Reeves was coming to help me reveal my hearing recovery. Instead, they saw her arrival as an opportunity to convince me that I needed institutional care. The cruelty of the timing was almost incomprehensible. They were going to destroy my Christmas, my family relationships, and my independence in one coordinated attack, using a medical appointment as cover for their intervention. As I sat there listening to my family plan my institutionalization and the theft of my financial resources, I realized that my Christmas surprise had become something entirely different. Instead of revealing my hearing recovery to bring joy to my family, I would be using it to expose their betrayal and protect myself from their manipulation. The revelation that I had been hearing them plot against me for the past 30 minutes was about to become the most important information of my life. I remained frozen at the kitchen table, clutching my coffee mug while my family continued planning my future without any input from the person whose life they were discussing. The conversation had moved beyond criticism into active conspiracy, and I struggled to process the depth of their betrayal while maintaining my facade of oblivious contentment. The lawyer I consulted said that demonstrating a pattern of dependency will strengthen our case. Dad continued, his voice still carefully modulated to avoid reaching my supposedly deaf ears. We need documentation that Jeanie consistently chooses helplessness over independence. That won't be hard to prove, Marcus replied. She hasn't even tried to find a real job since the library thing ended last month. My chest tightened with anger. The library position had ended because of budget cuts, not my performance. Mrs. Peterson had written me a glowing recommendation letter and promised to hire me back when funding was restored. I had been actively applying for other positions, but the job market for people with disabilities was challenging something my family apparently chose to interpret as laziness rather than discrimination. What about the driving situation? Amy asked. She could have learned to drive again by now if she really wanted independence. Exactly, Sarah agreed. She uses her hearing loss as an excuse to avoid responsibility. There are plenty of deaf people who drive work full-time and live independently. Jeanie just doesn't want to put in the effort. This accusation stung particularly deeply because I had been working with a driving instructor who specialized in training people with hearing impairments. I hadn't told my family because I wanted to surprise them by driving myself to a family gathering once I felt confident and safe. Their assumption that I was avoiding responsibility rather than being cautious about road safety showed how little they understood my actual situation. Mom sighed heavily. I just feel guilty about the whole thing. She's been through so much trauma. Mom guilt is not a parenting strategy, Sarah said firmly. Sometimes love means making hard decisions for someone who can't make them for herself. Jeanie has become comfortable with dependency and enabling that isn't helping her grow. The psychological manipulation in Sarah's words was masterful. She was reframing their desire to control my money and eliminate their caregiving responsibilities as a loving intervention for my own good. The way she spoke about me, as if I were a child incapable of adult decision-making, revealed how completely they had redefined our relationship. Jake glanced at his watch again. Should we get the kids back down here? It's almost time for presents, and that doctor will be arriving soon. Let's open presents first, Dad suggested. We want everyone in a good mood before we have the conversation with Jeanie. Christmas morning isn't ideal timing, but the whole family is here, and we've all agreed this needs to happen. Agreed was an interesting word choice since no one had asked for my opinion about my own future. They had apparently held family meetings about my life without including me reaching consensus about my incompetence and need for institutional care, while I remained blissfully unaware of their planning. Sarah called upstairs to summon Emma and Tyler for present opening. Within minutes, the living room filled with torn wrapping paper, excited squeals, and the controlled chaos of Christmas morning. I participated as enthusiastically as possible, taking photos of the kids and helping distribute gifts while internally reeling from what I had overheard. The gifts I had carefully selected to reveal my hearing recovery took on new meaning now. Dad's Beatles album would show that I had been listening to conversations he thought I couldn't hear. Mom's theater tickets would prove I had been following discussions about her interests. Sarah's book would demonstrate that I had heard her recommend it to Marcus. These presents would no longer be joyful surprises, but evidence that their private conversations hadn't been private at all. I watched my family interact with their gifts, noting the forced enthusiasm and frequent glances in my direction. They were performing happiness while planning to dismantle my life, and the cognitive dissonance was almost surreal. Emma hugged me after opening the art supplies I had bought her, and I wondered if she would still be allowed to visit me once I was institutionalized according to their plan. At 9:55, Dr. Reeves arrived with her portable testing equipment. She greeted everyone warmly, complimenting the Christmas decorations and asking about holiday plans. The family responded with their usual polite interest in my medical care, asking routine questions about my progress and expressing gratitude for her continued attention to my case. Jeanie has been doing remarkably well, Dr. Reeves told them as she set up her equipment in the living room. Her adaptation to hearing loss continues to exceed our expectations. She's become quite skilled at reading lips and managing in social situations. We're so proud of her progress, Mom replied, and the irony of her words after the kitchen conversation was almost unbearable. She's been such an inspiration, Sarah added, always staying positive despite everything she's been through. I wanted to scream at the hypocrisy, but I maintained my calm expression while Dr. Reeves prepared her testing materials. The plan was for her to conduct a few routine tests, during which I would begin showing signs of hearing recovery. The family would witness what appeared to be a medical miracle, and then I would surprise them with the revelation that I had been hearing for months. But now I faced a dilemma. Should I proceed with the original surprise plan, or should I use this opportunity differently? My family had just spent 30 minutes planning to steal my money, take away my legal rights, and institutionalize me against my will. Perhaps instead of giving them the joyful Christmas morning they didn't deserve, I should give them something else entirely. Before we begin, Dr. Reeves announced, "I want to prepare everyone for the possibility that Jeannie's hearing might have changed since our last appointment. Sometimes recovery can happen gradually without patients noticing immediate improvement. This was our planned setup for the surprise, but it felt different now. Instead of anticipating my family's delight, I was calculating how to use their shock to my advantage. They had revealed their true feelings about me, their willingness to betray my trust, and their plans to control my future. Now I needed to decide how to respond to that revelation." "That would be wonderful." Dad said, though his tone suggested he was thinking more about how hearing recovery might complicate their guardianship plans than about my well-being. "Absolutely," Marcus agreed. "We all want what's best for Jeanie." The phrase, "what's best for Jeanie," would have been touching if I hadn't just heard them discuss taking away my rights and accessing my money for their own benefit. They had decided what was best for themselves and were calling it concern for me. Dr. Reeves began with basic equipment checks explaining each step to my family, while I prepared mentally for what was about to unfold. The original plan had been simple: reveal my hearing, surprise my family, and enjoy a beautiful Christmas together. But the conversation I had overheard changed everything. Now I understood that my family saw me as a burden to be managed rather than a person to be loved. They viewed my disability as manipulation rather than a legitimate medical condition requiring accommodation. Most importantly, they were willing to sacrifice my autonomy and financial security for their own convenience. As Dr. Reeves positioned the first testing device, I realized that my Christmas surprise was about to become something entirely different than I had planned. Instead of revealing my recovery to bring my family joy, I would be using it to protect myself from their betrayal. The hearing test was about to begin, but this was no longer about medical evaluation. This was about justice, truth, and the power of information that my family didn't know I possessed. Dr. Reeves positioned her testing equipment while my family arranged themselves around the living room like an audience preparing for a performance. Mom sat on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped nervously. Dad stood near the fireplace checking his watch and glancing toward the kitchen where their conspiracy had taken place just minutes earlier. Sarah and Jake occupied the love seat, while Marcus and Amy claimed chairs by the window. "This will just take a few minutes," Dr. Reeves explained to the room. "I'll be conducting some basic auditory response tests to check for any changes in Jeannie's hearing capacity." I sat perfectly still in the designated chair, wearing the expression of patient cooperation I had perfected over 3 years of medical appointments. Inside, my mind raced through possible strategies for handling what was about to unfold. The original plan seemed naive now given what I had learned about my family's true intentions. Dr. Reeves placed the first set of headphones over my ears and began the standard hearing test protocol. The sound started soft and gradually increased in volume and complexity. According to our rehearsed plan, I would begin showing signs of response during this phase, indicating that something had changed since my last evaluation. But as the test progressed, I made a split-second decision that would alter everything. Instead of revealing my full hearing recovery immediately, I chose a more subtle approach that would give me control over the situation and time to assess my family's reactions. "Doctor," I said suddenly, my voice filled with confusion and wonder. "I think something's different. I'm hearing some of these tones." Dr. Reeves played her part perfectly, adjusting her equipment and trying different sound frequencies, while maintaining an expression of professional curiosity mixed with excitement. "Jeanie, this is remarkable," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Your responses suggest that there may have been some nerve regeneration. Let me try some different tests." The room erupted in surprised murmurs and excited whispers. Mom gasped and covered her mouth with her hands. Dad stepped closer, his expression shifting from skepticism to amazement. Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances that I couldn't quite interpret, though they seemed less purely joyful than confused. "Are you saying she might be getting her hearing back?" Mom asked, tears starting to form in her eyes. It's too early to make definitive statements, Dr. Reeves replied diplomatically, but these responses are definitely encouraging. Jeanie, can you tell me what you're experiencing? I took a deep breath and delivered the performance of my lifetime, describing the gradual return of sound as if I were experiencing it for the first time in years. I spoke about hearing the low hum of the heater, the distant sound of cars on the street, and most importantly, the voices of my family members. I can hear you talking, I whispered, as if the revelation was almost too wonderful to believe. Your voices sound different than I remember, but I can understand the words. The family's reactions were fascinating to observe now that I could hear their whispered comments to each other. Mom was crying with what appeared to be genuine happiness, but Dad looked concerned rather than celebratory. Sarah was whispering urgently to Jake, and Marcus was typing something on his phone with obvious agitation. This changes everything, I heard Sarah whisper to her husband. All our planning, the lawyer consultation, the facility research. Maybe it's not permanent, Jake whispered back. These medical recoveries sometimes reverse themselves. Their words confirmed that my decision to eavesdrop instead of surprising them had been the right choice. Even faced with what they believed was my miraculous recovery, their first thoughts were about how it would affect their plans to control my life and finances. Dr. Reeves continued the testing charade while I strategically revealed more of my hearing capacity. I responded to her voice, then to Mom's tearful questions, then gradually to other family members' comments. Each revelation was calculated to demonstrate that I had been hearing more than they realized. Jeanie, honey, can you hear me when I talk normally? Dad asked, though his tone suggested he was testing me rather than celebrating with me. Yes, Dad. You sound worried instead of happy. Why do you sound worried about my hearing coming back? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and I watched Dad scramble to adjust his expression and tone. Sarah shot him a warning look while Marcus continued typing on his phone with increasing urgency. Of course I'm happy, sweetheart. I'm just surprised. This is wonderful news. But his voice still carried undertones of concern that my newly revealed hearing could detect clearly. The family was realizing that their private conversations might not have been as private as they assumed. Dr. Reeves, I said, turning to face her with an expression of innocent curiosity. How long might I have been hearing sounds without realizing it? Could I have been unconsciously picking up conversations and voices over the past few weeks or months? The question was designed to plant fear about exactly how much I might have overheard, and I watched its impact ripple through the room. Sarah's face went pale, and Marcus stopped typing to stare at me with obvious alarm. It's certainly possible, Dr. Reeves replied, understanding the subtext of my question. Gradual hearing recovery can sometimes happen below the threshold of conscious awareness. Patients might be processing sounds and voices without recognizing that they're actually hearing them. So, I might have been hearing things for weeks without knowing it, I asked, maintaining my tone of innocent wonder while watching my family's growing panic. That's exactly how this type of recovery sometimes works, Dr. Reeves confirmed. The room fell silent except for the sound of Marcus's increasingly frantic texting. I realized he was probably warning other family members or possibly even contacting the lawyer Dad had mentioned. Their conspiracy was falling apart in real time, and they knew it. This is such incredible news, Mom said, though her voice now carried a note of uncertainty. Jeanie, what do you remember hearing recently? Has anything sounded familiar? It was a fishing expedition, and we all knew it. Mom was trying to determine how much of their private conversations I might have overheard without directly admitting that they had been discussing me behind my back. I'm not sure, I replied thoughtfully. Everything sounds strange and new, but also somehow familiar, like voices I should recognize but can't quite place. Sarah leaned forward anxiously. Jeanie, you know we've always tried to include you in family conversations, right? We've never said anything that would hurt your feelings or made decisions without considering your input. The statement was so blatantly false that I almost laughed. They had literally been planning my institutionalization 30 minutes earlier without any input from me whatsoever. But Sarah's defensive tone revealed that she was terrified about what I might have heard. "Of course," I said gently. "You've all been so supportive and loving. I can't imagine you ever saying anything hurtful about me." The irony in my words was lost on them, but Dr. Reeves gave me a subtle look that suggested she was beginning to understand that this revelation involved more than medical recovery. "Well," Dad said, clearing his throat nervously, "this certainly changes our Christmas plans. We had some family business to discuss with you later, but maybe we should postpone that conversation given this wonderful development." "Family business?" I asked with feigned innocence. What kind of family business I'd love to be included in family decisions now that I can hear the discussion? The panic in Dad's eyes was unmistakable. Marcus had gone completely silent, staring at his phone like it might provide salvation from their predicament. Sarah was gripping Jake's hand so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. "Oh, just some boring financial planning stuff," Dad said dismissively. "Nothing that needs to be addressed today. Today should be about celebrating your recovery." "Financial planning sounds important," I persisted, "especially if it affects me. I'd really like to be part of family discussions about money and planning. After 3 years of feeling left out of decision-making, it would mean so much to have my voice heard." The word choice was deliberate, and everyone in the room understood the double meaning. My voice was literally being heard for the first time in years, but I was also demanding that my opinions and preferences be considered in family decisions that affected my life. Dr. Reeves began packing up her equipment, but she was clearly reluctant to leave me alone with my family, given the tension that had developed during the appointment. "Jeanie," she said carefully, "given the significance of this development, I think we should schedule a follow-up appointment very soon. Perhaps after the holiday weekend, I want to monitor your progress and make sure this recovery remains stable." "That would be wonderful," I replied. "And Dr. Reeves, I hope I can ask you questions about my condition and my rights as a patient. I'm finally able to participate fully in discussions about my medical care." Another pointed comment that made my family shift uncomfortably. They were beginning to realize that my hearing recovery meant the end of their ability to make decisions about my life without my knowledge or consent. "Of course," Dr. Reeves said, "you have every right to be fully informed about your medical condition and treatment options. I'll make sure you have all the information you need to make your own decisions about your care." The emphasis on your own decisions was not accidental, and I saw Dad wince at the implications. Their guardianship plan had just become significantly more complicated, if not impossible. As Dr. Reeves prepared to leave, I realized that the next phase of this confrontation was about to begin. My family now knew that I could hear their conversations, but they didn't yet know how much I had actually overheard or how I planned to respond to their betrayal. The Christmas surprise had become something none of us had expected. Dr. Reeves gathered her equipment with deliberate slowness, clearly sensing the tension in the room but unsure of its source. As she prepared to leave, she turned back to address my family with professional concern. "I want to emphasize how remarkable this recovery is," she said, her voice carrying subtle warning undertones that only I fully understood. "Jeanie's progress over the past few months has been extraordinary. She's shown incredible determination and resilience in adapting to her condition." "Past few months?" Dad asked sharply. "Has she been showing signs of improvement during your regular appointments?" Dr. Reeves glanced at me, and I gave her a slight nod that told her it was time to reveal the truth. "Actually," she said carefully, "Jeanie's hearing has been recovering gradually since her surgery in June. We've been monitoring her progress closely, and she's been doing exceptionally well." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched the blood drain from Sarah's face as the implications hit her. Marcus dropped his phone, and Dad's mouth opened and closed without producing any sound. "Surgery in June," Mom whispered. "Jeanie, you had surgery. Why didn't you tell us?" I stood up slowly, feeling stronger and more confident than I had in years. The moment of truth had arrived and I was ready for it. "I wanted to surprise you for Christmas," I said, my voice clear and strong. "I thought it would be the most beautiful gift I could give my family. The chance to hear your voices again, to participate in conversations, to be part of the family instead of a burden you had to manage." Sarah flinched at the word burden, confirming that she remembered using it during their kitchen conspiracy. "But this morning," I continued, "I learned something that changed everything. I discovered that my loving, supportive family has been planning to have me declared incompetent so you can steal my money and put me in an institution." The accusation hung in the air like a bomb that had just exploded. Mom gasped and looked around the room in confusion, while Dad's face went from pale to red with anger and embarrassment. "Jeanie, that's not what we were discussing." Sarah started, but I cut her off. "Really?" Because I heard every word. "Would you like me to quote you directly?" I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app, showing them the file I had created during their kitchen conversation. "You said," and I quote, "she's become such a burden, and honestly, I think she's faking how helpless she is for attention. You also said that I weaponize my disability and that I'm manipulative." Sarah's face crumpled, but whether from guilt or anger, I couldn't tell. "Marcus," I continued, turning to my brother, "you said that I learned to weaponize my disability and that I was attention-seeking even before the accident. You compared me to my high school self, completely rewriting history to support your current narrative." Marcus stood up defensively. "Jeanie, you're taking things out of context. We're worried about you." "Worried about me?" I laughed bitterly. "Or worried about your own financial situations. Amy mentioned that my insurance settlement money could help the whole family if I wasn't going to use it productively." Amy shrank back in her chair as I turned my attention to her. "And Jake, you suggested that Sarah's stress about my situation was affecting your whole family. Tell me, how exactly has my presence in this house affected your family? Do I eat your food? Live in your house? Interfere with your children?" Jake opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. "And Dad," I said, my voice growing stronger with each revelation, "you've been consulting with lawyers about having me declared incompetent. You plan to use Christmas morning as an intervention to convince me that institutional care was for my own good." Dad found his voice, though it shook with anger. "Jeanie, you're being dramatic. We've been taking care of you for 3 years. We have every right to discuss what's best for your future." "Taking care of me," I repeated incredulously. "Is that what you call managing my finances without my knowledge? Because I'd like to see exactly where my insurance money has gone over the past 3 years. The room went dead silent. I had hit the nerve I was looking for. "What are you implying?" Dad asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating directly that I want a full accounting of how my money has been spent. Every penny of that settlement belongs to me, and I want to know where it went." Sarah jumped up from the couch. "How dare you accuse us of stealing from you? We've sacrificed everything to take care of you." "Sacrificed what exactly?" I challenged. "Your time? Your patience? Or are you talking about the sacrifices you made with my money?" I pulled a folder from behind the couch where I had hidden it earlier in the week. "I've already started investigating my financial records. It's amazing what you can accomplish when people think you can't hear phone conversations with banks and insurance companies." Dad's face went white as I opened the folder. "These are copies of statements from my checking account, which apparently has been jointly managed by you, Dad, without my knowledge or consent. Interesting how there are regular transfers to accounts belonging to Sarah and Marcus." "Those were reimbursements for expenses related to your care," Dad said quickly. "Really? So Sarah's vacation to Florida last spring was related to my care. Marcus's new car was a medical expense. The renovation to your kitchen was necessary for my disability accommodation." Each accusation hit its target. I had been quietly gathering evidence for weeks, using my secret hearing ability to collect information during phone calls and conversations they thought I couldn't follow. And here's my favorite discovery. I continued, pulling out another document. The life insurance policy you took out on me last year, the one that names all of you as beneficiaries. Tell me, how exactly does that relate to my care? Mom, who had been silent throughout this exchange, finally spoke up. Robert, please tell me this isn't true. Please tell me we haven't been stealing from our daughter. It's not stealing, Linda. We've been managing her affairs because she's not capable of doing it herself. Not capable. I stood up, my voice rising with 3 years of suppressed anger. I have a college degree. I was a teacher. I managed my own finances perfectly well before my accident. The only thing that changed was my hearing, not my intelligence or my judgment. You've been dependent on us for everything, Marcus protested. Food, housing, transportation, medical appointments. We've been supporting you completely. Have you? I challenged. Because according to these bank records, I've been paying rent to live in this house. I've been buying my own groceries. I've been covering my own medical expenses. The only thing you've been managing is access to my money. I turned to address the whole family, my voice shaking with emotion, but clear with purpose. For 3 years, I believed that you loved me despite my disability. I thought you were making sacrifices to help me rebuild my life. I felt guilty every day for being a burden on people who were choosing to care for me out of love. Tears were streaming down my face now, but my voice remained strong. But you never saw me as someone to love and support. You saw me as a source of income and a dependent who would never question your decisions. You used my disability to manipulate me into believing I was helpless while you stole my money and planned my future without any input from the person whose life you were controlling. Sarah was crying now too, but I couldn't tell if it was from guilt or self-pity. The worst part, I continued, is that you convinced me I was a burden. You made me believe that I owed you my gratitude and compliance because you were such generous, loving caregivers. You used my vulnerability against me while pretending to protect me. Dr. Reeves, who had been quietly observing this family implosion, finally stepped forward. I think I should mention, she said carefully, that during Jeannie's recovery process, I became concerned about some of the family dynamics I observed. Jeannie's progress was being undermined by what appeared to be learned helplessness, which often occurs when families inadvertently discourage independence in disabled relatives. She looked directly at Dad as she continued. I recommended that Jeanie keep her hearing recovery private specifically because I wanted to observe how the family functioned when they believed she couldn't monitor their behavior. This kind of evaluation is sometimes necessary when medical professionals suspect emotional or financial abuse of vulnerable patients. The words emotional abuse and financial abuse hit the room like physical blows. Dad's face went from red to purple, and Sarah looked like she might vomit. Are you saying you suspected we were abusing our daughter? Mom asked in a whisper. I'm saying that Jeannie's recovery was being inhibited by family dynamics that seemed designed to maintain her dependency rather than encourage her independence. Today's revelation confirms that those concerns were justified. Dr. Reeves pulled out her own phone. I'm required to report suspected elder abuse and financial exploitation of vulnerable adults to the appropriate authorities. Given what I've heard today, I'll be filing those reports this afternoon. The threat of official investigation sent panic through my family. Sarah grabbed Dad's arm. This is insane. We're her family. We love her. Do you? I asked quietly. Because love doesn't steal money from vulnerable people. Love doesn't plan to institutionalize someone against their will to access their finances. Love doesn't mock someone's disability behind their back while pretending to be supportive. I looked around the room at these people who had raised me, who I had trusted completely, who had betrayed that trust in the most fundamental way possible. You had 3 years to show me unconditional love and support during the most difficult period of my life. Instead, you showed me that family love comes with conditions, expectations, and a price tag. You taught me that my worth as a person was measured by my usefulness and my ability to contribute financially to your comfort. I picked up my purse and the folder of evidence. I'm leaving now. Dr. Reeves has offered to help me find temporary housing while I figure out my next steps. I'll be in contact through lawyers about recovering my stolen money and pursuing appropriate legal action. Jeanie, please, Mom begged. Don't destroy our family over money. We can work this out. I turned to look at her, this woman who had raised me, who had taught me about love and loyalty and family bonds. Mom, you didn't destroy this family over money. You destroyed it by choosing money over me. The family I thought I belonged to never actually existed. It was just a performance you all maintained as long as it benefited you. I headed toward the door, then turned back for one final statement. Merry Christmas, I said. I hope the money you stole from me was worth losing your daughter. And with that, I walked out of my childhood home and my childhood family forever. The 6 months following that Christmas confrontation became the most challenging and ultimately the most transformative period of my entire life. Dr. Reeves had not only helped me reclaim my hearing, but also connected me with resources I never knew existed for people escaping financial and emotional abuse within families. Within 48 hours of leaving my family's house, I was connected with Margaret Chen, an attorney who specialized in elder abuse and disability rights. Margaret was a fierce advocate who had seen too many cases like mine where families exploited disabled relatives while maintaining facades of loving caregivers. The good news, Margaret told me during our first meeting, is that you documented everything perfectly. The recorded conversations, the financial records, and Dr. Reeves's professional observations create a strong case for both criminal charges and civil recovery. The legal process moved faster than I had expected. The district attorney's office was particularly interested in the case because it involved systematic financial exploitation over multiple years, forged signatures on legal documents, and conspiracy to commit guardianship fraud. Sarah was charged with identity theft and financial exploitation after investigators discovered she had been using my credit cards for personal purchases, totaling over $15,000. Her defense, that she had been managing my affairs, collapsed when prosecutors demonstrated that I had never given consent for joint account access or credit card usage. Marcus faced similar charges for accepting money transfers from my accounts under false pretenses. The payments his wife Amy had received for caretaking services were particularly damaging to his case since bank records showed regular payments for care that was never provided and for hours that exceeded what would be physically possible. Dad's situation was the most serious because his role as the primary financial manager meant he faced felony fraud charges. The life insurance policy he had taken out on me without my knowledge was the piece of evidence that convinced prosecutors this was a coordinated long-term exploitation scheme rather than simple family financial mismanagement. The criminal proceedings took nearly 4 months, during which I lived in a transitional housing program for abuse survivors. The program provided not only safe housing, but also counseling services that helped me process the emotional trauma of discovering that my family's love had been conditional and manipulative. My therapist, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, helped me understand that my experience was unfortunately common among people with acquired disabilities. Families often struggle to adjust when a previously independent adult becomes dependent on their care, she explained. Some families rise to the challenge with genuine love and support. Others see dependency as an opportunity for control and financial gain. The hardest part was accepting that my family's betrayal hadn't been a momentary lapse in judgment, but a calculated pattern that had developed over 3 years. They had gradually convinced themselves that I was incapable of managing my own life, which justified their increasing control over my finances and decisions. The psychology of financial abuse within families is complex, Dr. Walsh continued. Abusers often genuinely believe they're acting in their victim's best interest even while they're exploiting them. They rationalize theft as management and control as protection. During the legal proceedings, Mom was the only family member who showed genuine remorse. She testified for the prosecution, revealing that she had been unaware of the extent of Dad's financial manipulation and had believed that my money was being properly managed for my benefit. I knew something was wrong. Mom testified, tears streaming down her face. I knew Robert and the kids were frustrated with Jeannie's dependency, but I thought they were just tired and stressed. I never imagined they were stealing from her while planning to have her declared incompetent. Mom's testimony was crucial in securing convictions, but it also opened the door for a possible relationship between us in the future. Unlike the others, her actions had been guided by misplaced trust in her husband rather than deliberate exploitation. The civil lawsuit resulted in full restitution of stolen funds, plus interest and penalties totaling nearly $75,000. Sarah and Marcus were forced to sell their homes to pay their portions of the settlement, which seemed like appropriate consequences for people who had planned to use my money to solve their own financial problems. Dad's business collapsed under the weight of legal fees and public scrutiny. The accounting firm that had trusted him with their clients' finances couldn't survive the scandal of his conviction for financial fraud. His professional reputation was destroyed just as he had planned to destroy my autonomy and independence. But the real transformation in my life went beyond legal victories and financial recovery. For the first time since my accident, I was completely independent and making my own decisions about everything from where I lived to how I spent my time. I found an apartment in a different neighborhood far from the memories and triggers associated with my family's betrayal. The space was small, but entirely mine, filled with furniture. I chose books I wanted to read and silence that belonged to me rather than being imposed by disability. Returning to work presented challenges I hadn't anticipated. The Dayton public schools were eager to have me back, but I discovered that my hearing recovery had changed how I related to both hearing and deaf communities. The cochlear implant gave me functional hearing, but the experience sounded different from natural hearing I remembered from before my accident. I decided to specialize in working with students who had hearing loss, using my unique perspective as someone who had lived in both hearing and deaf worlds. The position allowed me to help children navigate challenges I understood intimately while building on teaching skills I had developed before my accident. Ms. Morrison understands what we're going through, 8-year-old Katie told her mother after a particularly successful lesson. She knows how hard it is to feel different, but she also knows we can do anything we want to do. The comment reminded me why I had become a teacher originally. Education had always been about empowering young people to believe in their own potential, and my experience with disability had only deepened my commitment to that mission. I also became involved with advocacy organizations that work to prevent financial abuse of people with disabilities. My case became something of a landmark because the systematic nature of my family's exploitation and the evidence I had gathered made it an ideal teaching tool for recognizing warning signs. Family financial abuse is often the hardest type to detect and prosecute. I explained during speaking engagements at disability conferences. Victims want to believe their families love them unconditionally, so they interpret exploitation as care and control as protection. My story resonated with audiences because it demonstrated that disability doesn't make people inherently vulnerable. Rather, families and institutions sometimes choose to exploit disability to justify control and manipulation. Dr. Reeves and I maintained a close professional relationship that gradually evolved into genuine friendship. Her decision to support my secret hearing recovery plan had been based on years of experience with family dynamics around disability, and she felt vindicated by how the situation had unfolded. I've seen too many patients whose recovery was sabotaged by families who benefited from their dependence, she told me. Your case was unusual because you had the cognitive ability to gather evidence and the financial resources to pursue justice. Most victims don't have those advantages. 18 months after leaving my family, I received a letter from Mom asking if we could meet for coffee. She had divorced Dad, moved to a small apartment across town, and was attending counseling to process her role in enabling his behavior. I know I don't have the right to ask for your forgiveness, she wrote. But I want you to know how proud I am of the strength you've shown and how sorry I am that our family failed you when you needed us most." I agreed to meet her, though I was careful to keep expectations low. The woman who sat across from me at the coffee shop looked older and sadder than I remembered, but also somehow more honest than she had been during the years of family performance. "I've been thinking about all the times I should have questioned what was happening," she said quietly. "All the times I chose to believe Robert's explanations instead of trusting my instincts that something was wrong." We talked for 2 hours, and while I couldn't offer forgiveness immediately, I could see the possibility of rebuilding some form of relationship in the future. Mom was the only family member who had taken responsibility for her role in my abuse and was actively working to understand how it had happened. Sarah and Marcus had moved away from Dayton after their convictions, apparently unable to handle the social consequences of their crimes becoming public knowledge. I heard through mutual acquaintances that their marriages had survived the scandal, but their relationships with their children had been strained by having parents who were convicted felons. Dad had remarried within a year of the divorce, choosing a woman 20 years younger who apparently didn't know about his criminal history. I felt sorry for his new wife, though I hoped she would be more cautious about financial management than my mother had been. 2 years after my Christmas revelation, I met someone who would become the most important relationship in my new life. David was a social worker who specialized in disability advocacy, and we met at a conference where I was speaking about financial abuse prevention. "Your presentation was incredible," he told me after my talk. "The way you turned your trauma into education for others is inspiring." David had been born with cerebral palsy, so he understood disability from a completely different perspective than my family had. He saw my hearing loss as one characteristic among many, rather than the defining feature of my identity or a source of limitation that needed to be managed. "The thing about disability," David said during one of our early conversations, "is that it teaches you who really loves you unconditionally and who just loves the idea of being seen as generous and caring." Our relationship developed slowly and carefully, built on mutual respect and genuine compatibility rather than caretaking dynamics. David encouraged my independence while offering support when I needed it, a balance that felt revolutionary after years of being treated as inherently helpless. On Christmas morning, 3 years after the confrontation that had changed everything, I woke up in my own apartment, in my own bed, surrounded by decorations I had chosen and presents from people who loved me for who I was rather than what I could provide for them. David and I were hosting dinner for a small group of friends from the advocacy community, including Dr. Reeves, Margaret Chen, and several other people who had become my chosen family. Mom would be joining us as well after 2 years of rebuilding trust and establishing new boundaries. As I prepared the meal in my own kitchen using dishes I had purchased with my own money in a home where I made all the decisions, I reflected on how completely my life had transformed. The woman who had been planning a Christmas surprise for her family 3 years earlier had been naive and trusting, eager to please people who saw her as a burden and a source of income. The woman I had become was stronger, wiser, and infinitely more selective about who she trusted with her vulnerability. I had learned to value independence over belonging, authenticity, over approval and justice over family harmony. The lesson that had emerged from my experience wasn't just about disability or financial abuse, though those were important components. The deeper lesson was about the difference between conditional and unconditional love, between families that support growth and families that exploit dependency, between people who see others as individuals worthy of respect and people who see them as problems to be managed. When my guests arrived that Christmas afternoon, the house filled with laughter, conversation, and the sound of people who had chosen to be together rather than being obligated by genetics or guilt. Dr. Reeves brought her partner, a woman she had been with for 15 years. Margaret brought her teenage daughter, who was interested in disability law. David's parents drove down from Columbus, bringing stories about their son's childhood and pride in his advocacy work. Mom arrived last carrying a homemade apple pie and flowers for the table. She had learned to participate in my life as a guest rather than a manager offering support when asked, while respecting my autonomy in all decisions. "Jeanie," she said quietly as I hugged her at the door, "thank you for giving me the chance to learn how to be a better mother." It was a small statement, but it represented years of hard work and painful honesty about past mistakes. I couldn't undo the years of betrayal and exploitation, but I could choose to build something new with the one family member who had been willing to take responsibility for her role in my abuse. During dinner, Margaret's daughter asked me about my work with abuse prevention, clearly considering her own future career path. "The hardest part," I explained, "isn't identifying abuse when it's obvious. It's recognizing manipulation that disguises itself as care and control, that presents itself as protection." "How do you tell the difference?" she asked. "Real care empowers people to make their own decisions and supports their independence. Fake care creates dependency and makes people feel guilty for having needs or preferences." David squeezed my hand under the table, proud of how I had learned to articulate insights that had been hard-won through painful experience. As the evening wound down and our friends prepared to leave, I stood in my living room looking at the remnants of our celebration. Empty wine glasses, crumpled napkins, and the comfortable disorder that follows good food and better conversation. 3 years earlier, I had planned a Christmas surprise that I thought would bring my family joy. Instead, that surprise had revealed truths that ultimately set me free from people who saw my disability as an opportunity for exploitation rather than a challenge requiring genuine support. The family that had raised me was gone, destroyed by their own greed and manipulation. But the family I had chosen, the people who respected my intelligence, supported my independence, and valued my contributions, surrounded me with love that was unconditional and honest. I had learned that hearing recovery was about much more than regaining a physical sense. It was about learning to trust my own perceptions, to value my own judgment, and to demand the respect that every person deserves, regardless of their abilities or limitations. As David helped me clean up the kitchen, he asked the question I always pose to my conference audiences. If you could go back and change what happened with your family, would you? I considered the question seriously, as I always did. The trauma had been real, the betrayal devastating, and the loss of my childhood family permanently painful. But the person I had become, the relationships I had built, and the work I was doing had all emerged from that experience. "No," I said finally, "I wouldn't change it. Because changing it would mean missing the opportunity to learn who I really am when I'm not trying to please people who don't actually love me." "And who are you?" David asked, though he knew the answer. "I'm someone who survived betrayal and chose justice, someone who lost her hearing and found her voice, someone who was taught to see herself as a burden and learned to recognize her own worth." I looked around my kitchen, my home, my life that belonged entirely to me. I'm someone who knows the difference between being loved and being managed, and I'm someone who will never settle for anything less than the real thing again. That night, as I fell asleep in my own bed in my own apartment, I thought about the 8-year-old children I would be teaching when school resumed after winter break. Kids who were learning to navigate the world with hearing loss, just as I had learned to navigate the world after discovering that family love could be conditional and manipulative. I would teach them about sign language and assistive technology, about advocacy and self-determination. But most importantly, I would teach them that their worth as human beings was not dependent on their ability to make other people comfortable or to minimize their own needs. The greatest lesson I had learned was that sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones who understand you the least. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away from people who see your vulnerability as an opportunity for control. My hearing had been restored, but more importantly, my voice had been found. And I planned to use it for the rest of my life to ensure that other people in vulnerable situations would know they deserved better than conditional love disguised as care. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and self-respect? Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who hurt us most deeply, whether through betrayal, manipulation, or simply taking our love for granted. I'd love to hear your thoughts about family relationships and how we can recognize when love becomes exploitation. Please share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, consider liking this video and subscribing for more stories about overcoming adversity and finding strength in unexpected places. Sharing these stories helps other people recognize that they're not alone in facing family challenges and that there's always hope for building the life you deserve. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I hope it reminds you that your worth is never defined by other people's treatment of you, but by your own courage to demand the respect and love you deserve.